Yes, here we are. The idea here is how to have a beautiful garden with minimal expense, time, expense, effort, work, whatever. And I'm speaking of woody plants, flowers, vegetables, shrubs, everything we grow. And the idea is to enjoy your garden. You know, we all probably have those benches out there and the cute little chairs. And the question is, how often do you sit out there? I know you may be like me. Every time I go out there and I sit, I see a weed or something that needs to be pruned. But the idea is to just let it go sometimes and enjoy what you've done. I've given you a handout. I think you have a copy with some resources and some notes, but we'll go on. There are two steps really to reduce work in the garden. One is right plant, right place, which you've probably heard before. And the other one is mulch. To me, mulch is the key to everything. So we'll talk about right plant and then right place. When you choose a plant, you want to consider the correct temperature. Does it need a lot of heat? Does it not like heat? Is it, you know, I'd like to grow lupines. I've seen them in Alaska, but we can't grow lupines here. And I can't grow delphiniums because it's too hot. Disease resistance, to me, that is a major thing because less resistance means more work, obviously, and the growth habit of the plant. So we'll go into some more detail on this. That's where you are, isn't it? Anybody recognize that?
That's the commons.
Yes,
our commons.
Yeah, so you are in zone 7A, and that means your lowest temperature is generally 0 to 5. Although nowadays it seems like it's a lot warmer than that, doesn't it? That also means that the average first frost is November 15th. We might be able to kick that forward a week or two. And the average last frost is March 29. Although I'd be surprised if that happens. But we have to consider those temperatures and the zone whenever you buy a plant and you want to grow something. So in addition to considering temperature, we want to consider microclimates and heat zones. I think every residence has these. Usually it's near the house, near the porch, near the garage. This is I think this is from my yard, although it's singularly unattractive, but you can see there are, there's brick here. Let's see, I'll do this. That's a laser pointer. Brick and brick and brick, a little stone here. So what that means is these flowers are going to have a much warmer climate than something that would be out further on the property near the edge of the, well, near somebody else's land, really, or trees. In my yard, I have an area that's protected like this, and I grow camellias there because camellias tend to be sensitive and they do well there. So let's go forward. If you want to have less maintenance, low effort, it would be best to grow perennials. Perennials are hardy plants. They will winter outside. You don't bring them in. They're not tender. They don't need any protection. Annuals, as you know, you have to plant every year unless they self-sow. Things like zinnias, petunias, they're pretty, we like them, but they're not low effort because next year, unless you plant something else there, you'll have just a naked soil. And forget about tropicals unless you want to bring them in, and that's not low maintenance. But you can see that these woody plants are really, you also have to consider varieties and hybrids. We talk a lot about heirlooms, but heirlooms are heirlooms because after the heirlooms were there, hybridizers created varieties and disease-resistant hybrids, and that means less crop loss, less spraying, few pests, few diseases. So, I mean, those are all good considerations because if you're like I am, you'd prefer to go organic. You don't want to spray. So consider all American selections and look at trial gardens when you're choosing. I grow vegetables. I think a lot of people probably do, at least greens, herbs, or tomatoes. And if you look at the catalog for tomatoes or vegetables, or you look at the seed packet, you'll notice all these abbreviations. And this is what you want to consider when you're deciding what to plant, because you can lose your crop and it's a lot of work. And so if you're looking at vegetables, here's a link, but I think you could just Google Cornell disease resistance and you'll come up with their catalog, their list. Okay, roses. Roses are anathema to low maintenance gardening. However, that doesn't stop a lot of us from growing roses. I grow roses. I'm trying to be very careful about what I choose. The US Botanic Garden downtown has a national rose garden. Well, it's really the national garden. I think it's called the First Lady's Rose Garden. And that's a really good place to look because they don't spray, they don't use chemicals. So they only grow the roses that will thrive in those conditions. Also, it's very warm down there because they're surrounded by cement. And so they're probably in 7B or maybe even 8th zone. So if you see a rose that's thriving there, you can grow it. And also on their website, I gave you a reference. You can look up what they recommend and what they grow. These are more places to look for roses. Earth kind roses. These were developed by I think it's University of Texas. It's Agricultural School. And you can find these on the market. They're developed for disease resistance. ADR trials. Those are they're German, and the Germans have done a whole lot in developing roses that are disease resistant. Cortis roses are the same. Chambly roses are a good place to find them. And then there's this source for people who really like roses. It's called Help Me Find. And you can look up Help Me Find Roses and you can search for roses that are disease resistant. And these pictures are from my garden. I grow floribundas because I find that floribundas are quite productive and tend to be more disease resistant than most. Although I will say that some of my roses look like this, really beautiful. And then a few weeks later, you see a lot of leaves with holes in them and they really don't look so good. But I don't do anything about that except maybe cut them back a bit and they rebloom just like this. Then there are the knockout roses. These used to be the staple for roses, but even knockouts now are getting rose rosetta and other diseases. So they're not totally reliable. And, you know, if you're like me, they're sort of boring. I mean, they do this and you think, I might as well go to Michael's and buy those plastic roses because they do it day in and day out. And I like a little variation. Here's a favorite, Julia Child. This is her rose, and it's yellow, of course, and it's supposed to even smell a little bit like butter. So you can consider that one. And then we have Daybreaker. This is another floribunda that I grow. And again, no spraying, looks pretty good. But again, you have to be accepting here. You see a few little holes in the leaves, maybe some spots, but nothing that's going to kill the rose bush or the roses. You just have to accept a few blemishes, and that's low maintenance. Here's another Sun Sprite, very reliable. And there are new ones every year, so you have to check. Now we have to consider powdery mildew. You probably all know powdery mildew. Zinnias, all kinds of plants get them, and phlox are well known for powdery mildew, but there are varieties we can grow that are resistant to it. Binary zinnias, they're fantastic. They're big. They're like florist zinnias. Yeah, and they don't get powdery mildew. And here's another favorite. I grow zowies.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, zowies are not really big.
10 minutes ago.
They're pretty, well, they are a foot and a half, really. And they will just fill a garden. And you don't have to do anything to them. They're just perfect. No powdery mildew. And then everything in the Profusion series here. These are gold medal winners, do not get powdery mildew and are really nice. And Monarda, we like to grow Monarda because butterflies and pollinators love it, but commonly Monarda gets powdery mildew. Jacob Klein is probably the most reliable for no powdery mildew. Here are some examples from my garden. I like fragrant plants and hybrid honeysuckles, not the Japanese, but the hybrids are really good for that. But I used to grow gold flame, and here's a picture of it, and it was really pretty. And then the leaves, everything would get covered with powdery mildew. And no matter what I did, it just never looked good. And I struggled with it till I realized that Major Wheeler came around, and Major Wheeler is just as prolific as any honeysuckle. And I don't have to do a thing to it. And it looks like this, seriously. So I planted 2 or 3. It's really a great honeysuckle, no powdery mildew, no work. So if we want low maintenance, we cannot grow invasives. And we've all seen things like this. You cannot have English ivy. You cannot have vines. It's work to get rid of them, but you can't leave them because you'll never get them out of your garden. I think vines are going to cover the world. They'll eat everything. And so what we have to consider are native alternatives. And this includes no vinca and vinca minor. It's just, they're bad plants. So here's some lists. You can also look on the internet and find Pachysandra is a bad one, the Japanese Pachysandra, but you can grow Allegheny spurge, which is sort of it's a native Pachysandra, and creeping phlox, Solomon seal. There are lots of choices here, but we cannot have trees being eaten by vines. You know, every year the list of invasives seems to get larger, and really an invasive is Well, the definition is a non-native species that causes ecological or economic harm. And generally they mature quickly, they germinate fast, they generate many offspring, and they can tolerate a wide variety of habitats. And that means they just take over. So if you take a walk in a local park, and you see the English ivy, you might see pachysandra, you could even see burning bush. These are plants that have escaped cultivation and are pushing out native alternatives. And that's important that we not let that happen, because our birds, our pollinators, our insects rely on the native plants. And so we want to remove them. I know I have planted these. I have removed burning bush and I've replaced these. And so it's sort of, gardening has to be considered sort of like interior decorating. Maybe if you get a chair in your living room, it looks really bad, and you go shopping, you replace it, you move things around. That's what we have to do. I don't know if any of you have planted Bradford pears. I have. This is a tree that I had a long time ago. And in fact, I had 3 of them. And in the 60s, I think the government was advocating Bradford pear as a good tree to plant, easy care. And what it did was it became invasive. If you drive down some of our freeways, 95 South, in the spring, you can see huge clumps and clusters of Bradford pear trees. And I took them out. I replaced them because it became a bad tree. They're invasive. Here's what I put in instead. This is Nisus sylvatica, and a black gum commonly, and it's a perfect tree. It has a narrow spread. I planted in what's called the Hell Strip right by the street, and it's just beautiful. It's resistant to leaf spot. It's a native tree. So basically, we can do better. And this is low maintenance. Japanese barberry. You probably have seen this. It's in parks now. And unfortunately, garden centers sell these things, and they sell English ivy, and they shouldn't, but they do. So, it behooves us to share this information. I convinced my next door neighbors not to put in Japanese barberry, and they planted a unanimous instead. But we have very acceptable alternatives. The winter berries are really nice, and robins and cedar waxwings will come along and eat all these berries. So we can do better. We also have to avoid the aggressive plants. They're called thugs. They're not invasive, but they're a lot of work. And I'm going to show you some. I have Japanese anemone. It's a plant that tends to run. Have any of you planted that?
Yeah.
Well, I have. But you know what? I didn't take it out entirely. I guess I'm a glutton for punishment, because every year I have to pull some out, dig them out, because it likes to run. But you see how beautiful these are? They get to be tall. It's a tall, airy, see-through plant. And they bloom. A big advantage is they bloom in the fall after most plants are disappearing. And so our pollinators have something to go to in the fall when other plants have finished blooming. And here's a close-up. And so what I'm saying is sometimes you can tolerate a little bit of work, but these plants have to really prove their value. And here are two other thugs that I have grown. Here's one. It's called the chameleon plant, Hutania cordata variegata. I found it very useful to grow in a swale because it likes moist areas. It's rather low. The thing is, it will spread and you just can't get rid of it. My husband hates me for growing this because maybe 10 years later, we're still digging it up. It just creeps everywhere that you don't want it. And it can push out more desirable plants like the lobelia I planted next to it. So you have to consider it. Oenothera, Mexican primrose, is a very pretty little plant. And if you have a big bare area or an area that's contained, maybe with some bricks around it, you can grow Oenothera. It comes in yellow also, and it will fill that area and it will be beautiful and you won't have any work, but it will cover everything. And you can see how pretty that is, but it will take over everything around it. So here is a close-up of the chameleon plant, and there it is in the garden. It's next to some hibiscus, but we took it out. Here's another one. I don't know if you've grown this passiflora. It's passion flower. I thought it was gorgeous, but then I realized it had long runners, long roots, and it was spreading and spreading, and the roots get very deep. So although it was pretty, I removed it. Maybe you don't have trouble with this, but I did. It's a Canthus mollis, bears breeches, and I planted it as a foundation plant. It's really nice and it's a classic plant, but it ran. I just had to dig it out. So I took that one out too. You'll probably find your own invasive plants or thugs. Consider the right place for the plant: size, moisture, and light. You'll see in your neighborhood probably plants that have grown over the windows of the house, plants that are too tall for the space, trees, shrubs are most common. And what happens is they have to prune them. You have to prune the plant. And pruning is not low maintenance. So what you do is you have to choose a plant that at maturity will be appropriate for the space. And you will not have to prune it. It will grow perfectly. And at maturity, it will be, excuse me, exactly the right size. So you have to read the plant tags carefully and maybe even do a little research before you buy something, because plant tags can sometimes be inaccurate. And for instance, boxwood comes in a lot of varieties and a lot of sizes. So use a dwarf if the standard variety will outgrow the space and require pruning. And don't plant things that you'll eventually have to remove. It's a waste of money, it's a waste of time, and it's work. So foundation plantings. This is a foundation planting that has outgrown its space. It's no longer a foundation planting. It's sort of a prison. You can't see out of the windows. So you want to create something that will adorn or accent the house, not cover the house. And you want to be able to see out of it. And it's really not safe even to plant things like this as foundation plantings. You want to give every plant room to grow, no hiding places. And pruning should only be done for the plant health, rejuvenation, and not to reduce the size. And pruning is done to give woody plants air, air circulation and light, so you don't have holes in the plant. This is a boxwood. Maybe some of you have boxwoods. For a boxwood, I just prune my boxwoods, and you use polka dot pruning, it's called, and you cut out little areas, and it allows light and air to come in so you can get a fuller plant, but you're not pruning to reduce the size. Now for moisture, you have to consider areas that are wet or dry and group the plants. If you have a swale or a wet area, you can make a bog, you can grow lobelia, but don't mix it with plants like Agastache or plants that don't need much moisture. You don't want to have to water. You don't have to water, or if you water one area, you don't have to single it out. You can use xeriscaping for dry places, and I don't mean just cactus. I mean things like coneflowers, rudbeckia, things that will grow well without a lot of water. And these are some of my favorites. I have a xeriscaping area in my yard. It's actually what you call the health strip. It's between the sidewalk and the street. And I've dug out all the grass and I put in plants that don't need water. These are some of my favorites, Agastache, and I get these from a place, I buy a lot of plants through catalogs, High Country Gardens. It's in New Mexico, and they have a lot of dry area plants. So I have in my health strip, I have, instead of grass, I have these plants that don't need much water, and they're very pretty. Pollinators like them. They smell good. And for your damp areas, you can have a bog. Rain gardens are becoming popular. You can grow pitcher plants in those areas and they'll thrive. And you can see Sarracena here. It's really a pretty plant. It gives you more options. And if you want to have low maintenance, you can't have a lot of grass. You could plant grass substitutes or taking grass out, or plant grass that doesn't need to be cut often. You could plant zoysia grass. It grows very slowly and it's a very tough grass, but you want to minimize mowing. I have used this under a fence in a swale. These are forget-me-nots. These are not the sylvatica. Sylvatica is a woodland plant. It's forget-me-nots also, but this variety grows in wet areas, and I don't have to mow the grass or deal with anything under the fence, and I get oceans of blue. It's very pretty. Mondo grass is a good grass substitute. It's evergreen. Once it's established, you don't have to do much at all to it. You can see it in some areas downtown by the Smithsonian, and it really looks like this. It's pretty. You don't have to do a thing to it. And mulch, you have to have mulch. If you don't have mulch and you have bare earth, you have weeds, because nature abhors a void. You have to either grow plants close together or put down mulch next to your plants. This is a quote from Ruth Stout, who is a pioneer in low maintenance organic gardening. This is a picture of Ruth, and she gardened until she was in her 90s. Her method was no till, no dig, no water, no weed, and no composting, because she mulched deeply and it was really composting in place. And she grew all the vegetables she needed for her family. She used hay and straw. She liked to mulch deeply, but the Extension Service recommends mulch no deeper than 2 to 3 inches because they believe that you can get insects, voles, and diseases if your mulch is too deep. But mulch decomposes if it's organic, so you have to keep adding to your mulch, because basically your mulch has to be deep enough to screen out the light, because if there's light, you can get weeds. Now, what kind of mulch? I say the best mulch is free. Your mulch has to be organic because you want it to decompose and add organic matter to improve the soil. Cinders, plastic, sheeting, landscape fabric, gravel, it's just not going to add to your soil. It's not going to block out all the light. It's not good mulch. So I say if you can get it from the parks and near the community gardens, they put out big piles of mulch and you can take it for free. I use yard waste, I use grass clippings, and I use leaves. I especially use yard waste, grass clippings in my vegetable garden. I cut the grass and I catch it in the catcher on the mower, and I empty it right in the vegetable garden around the tomatoes and other vegetables, and I don't have to weed it. And it keeps the soil moist and the vegetables thrive. And it just composts in place. You can also, my husband doesn't like it around the flower beds in the visible part because he thinks it's unsightly. So you can buy shredded hardwood mulch, get it free from the park. You can use various types, shredded hardwood mulch, Virginia fines. Cocoa shells are really good around roses and they smell very good, but don't use dyed mulch. We don't need to put chemicals in our beds. And try some new plants every year. New plants, you can get inspired. Go to Green Springs, Longwood Gardens, Smithsonian Gardens. We are replete with wonderful places. If you want to go farther out, go to Chanticleer in Pennsylvania. We have meadowlark in Vienna. So are you hearing an echo here?
Just got weird. Echoing.
Are we okay?
Yeah.
Does somebody want to hear an encore about deer? How to keep deer out of your garden? Would you like to hear it?
Yes.
I'll go on. So we just got an echo. Do you hear an echo?
Yes,
Yes.
I hear an echo.
Yes.
You hear an echo. Did
I
it
can-
stop?
Yeah, just stopped. Okay.
Okay, good.
Stopped.
I'll try to change some things here. So, do you have questions? You want to talk about this?
Echoes back.
Hey, this is Susan. I'm still here. I'm sorry. It was so fascinating. I just kept listening.
Same here.
Betty, there's something going on in your world that I muted you and the echo went away. So if it starts again, we might just want to mute you until you want to speak.
Do you
Okay.
want to hear? Do you want to hear the deer part? How to keep deer out?
Yes,
Yeah.
I would like to.
Okay, let's hear it. This is how I deal with deer. You know, you've seen the plants, and I have 1,000 tulips in my front yard in the spring. And I couldn't do that unless I had deer control, because deer are everywhere now. Here's a natural method that I have used. This is a garden I have. It's a daylily bed, and it's across the street on someone else's land, but I use it. And it's by a swimming pool, so I can't really fence the daylily bed. So I use rosemary as a natural control. And you can see my rosemary hedge here. Here's the beginning of a rosemary hedge. I grow it all from cuttings. So I just need, you can buy one rosemary plant and make dozens from it using cuttings. And if you want to know how to do that, I can tell you how to propagate rosemary. But the reason why this works as a deterrent to deer is that they don't like very fragrant aromatic plants because it interferes with their defense mechanism. They need to be able to smell. So if you have lavender, rosemary, anything that's strongly scented, it will keep the deer away. And that's why I use rosemary. For my front yard, I do not have a fence. An 8-foot fence works too, but I can't fence a front yard. So the motion activated sprinkler called the water scarecrow works very well. It sprays, it makes an intermittent spray of water, and it scares the deer. You can control it, the distance and the spread, but here's the improved one. I call it, well, it's the Yard Enforcer by Orbit, and you can control its activation times. So it'll spray at night or late in the day, early in the morning. So during the day, when you're working in the garden or the mail carrier comes by, it won't spray you. And you can get these on Amazon. It's not that expensive, and you buy it once. Whereas the chemicals, you know, you have to spray them. It makes your garden stinky. If you go away and forget, the deer can just take out all your hostas or your tulips. So this has worked very well for me.
I had a question about propagating the rosemary.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about how to do that. What you do is the rosemary, it's a woody plant, and there's new growth on the tips every year or a couple times a year, and little pretty little purple or blue flowers. So what you do is you take a clipping of the tender new growth at the end, not the woody part, the tender part. So you make a cutting about that big, and then you strip the bottom of the cutting. You take the leaves off, and so you have a bare stem there. And then you get a little cup or a little pot, and you fill it with vermiculite or sand, a growing medium. And then you water it, get it all wet, take a pencil and poke a hole in your growing medium. And then you get rooting powder, rooting compound. You can get this on the internet, or you can buy it at a garden center. It's rooting hormones, really.
Does
And
it go bad? Because I have some old rooting hormone.
no, you can use that.
Yeah. That's
Just
what I
so
thought.
you wet the tip of the stem, you wet it, dip it in water, and then you dip it in the rooting hormone, and then you put it in the hole in the growing medium, and you tuck it in, and you keep it moist, and within several weeks it'll start to root, and you let it grow a little bit, and when you have nice roots, you put it in the ground. And that's how you get more or multiple rosemary plants from buying one.